Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the channel. My name is Kubeir. I'm a CICC licensed immigration consultant, and I love doing these live streams because there's so much of energy. There's so much of information that I would like to share with you whenever we do this. But today is even better. Today is even special. Why? Because we have with us Stephen Meurrens.
Hello.
How are you, Stephen? It's
Good.
been
How are
quite
you
some
doing?
time, right? Perfectly well. I'm right now in this beautiful city. It's also referred to as the city of Nawabs, a very princely state, Hyderabad in India. And if I was going to draw the curtains, it's going to sort of reflect the light. But a beautiful city. Have been here since for a very long time. Love playing golf here. That's
Oh,
one of the
nice.
reasons why I keep coming back. And imagine what the weather is going to be like when we get back home. So wanted to stay here a bit longer. But today's discussion has to do more with what's happening in Canada. I mean, don't you think it's so when you wake up in the morning and you switch on your live stream, or you switch on your stream or your feed on Twitter or on Facebook or Insta, wherever that might be, there's always something lingering, especially with the changes that have been happening recently. Every single morning you wake up, there's something or the other that's boiling. What do you think about? I mean, why is it that suddenly so many changes are being thrown at us?
I mean, the joke that I've had is that there can't be any more by-elections because every time the Liberals lose one, there's a whole slate of rapid immigration changes. And I'll even the pace it's going, forget just by-election losses. It's every time there's a new poll that shows the
Yeah.
Liberals still down 20 points. I think they're going to do whatever it takes.
Have you seen the recent video that Justin Trudeau put out on immigration?
Yeah, where I had a couple of thoughts on it. First, the production value. They're clearly taking a page out of Pierre Poilievre's playbook with these highly, the music. There's clips in the background. Made me actually think
Yeah.
if he uses the same software that he uses for your videos, where he's cutting to different scenes. And he laid it out, blaming everyone but themselves.
Yeah.
Including immigration consultants, which I thought was a bit of a weird low blow. Yeah, I think they recognize that immigration got out of control. They don't seem to think that it has to do with them, but they are determined to bring it down.
The blame is always on somebody else, right? And yeah, I mean, immigration consultants get a fair share of that blame as well. I wonder, are lawyers all clean?
Uh, I mean, if you just go through
No,
the
you don't have
different
to.
law
You don't have
society reports, I'd say no. I mean, it was interesting. I always take care to use the term immigration representative in anything that I post.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's they have to point the finger. I mean, it made me wonder, like, not that I want to get this into a discussion about immigration consultants, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
assume
Yeah.
that they polled and did focus groups on every single term in that video. And it just made me wonder, like, okay, like big box stores, like they were,
Yeah.
whether there's, anyway, I don't know. He felt that, going after that term would benefit him in the video.
Well, he said the big box stores. He spoke about the diploma mills. He's talking about the institutions and colleges. He's obviously not saying anything about the universities. So they're obviously
Nope,
clean,
he
right?
didn't say anything about how they bulk approved all delayed TRV applications in the end of 2022 and told both IRCC and CBSA not to be concerned if whether they would leave Canada by the end of the period authorized for their stay, which is 20,000 refugee claimants.
Big number there. And then you also had the Mexicans, right? I mean, they made it easier for them, and then they had to stop that one.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest groups, like if you look in the International Mobility Program, it's all the Ukrainians who arrived, right? That's about
They are, yes.
300,000. You have open work permits for Iranian nationals, open work permits for Israelis, all these different programs that they just expanded so many programs, which, they made the choice that they did. And rather than owning it right now, they seem to be pointing the fingers at other people. Which, fair enough. That's politics, I guess.
Of course. what's your thoughts on this issue with the refugees or the asylum claimants? I know the students, I actually put out a tweet and I got a lot of flack for that one. But as of right now, I am not going to talk about specific communities because that's where it all comes down to. Of course, Indians are getting a lot of flack as well. Some of it deserved, well deserved, but largely, I think because Indians form the majority in terms of the international students and in the number of immigrants who are coming to Canada, so they are easily seen as a bigger group, and obviously with some things that they haven't done correctly, obviously brings the blame to the community. But by and large, the international students claiming asylum, that one is also getting a lot of attention. What's your thoughts on that one?
I mean, depending on who you talk to, like either there are a lot of, I mean, in that volume of a sudden spike in refugee claims out of India, depending on who you talk to, there could be a lot of fake claims. Fake in the sense though, like, I mean, when I say fake claims, I don't mean to disparage these people. Like, I assume a lot of them went into considerable debt to come to Canada. And who knows what the situation back home with their families are, right? Like, if families went into huge debt,
True.
borrowing money from who knows who to come to Canada, attend these programs, and now are having the door slammed shut on them, I would imagine the situation back home for a lot of these students is not going to be very good. Whether they are being, properly instructed to file refugee claims, time will tell as the claims are processed. It also happens at a time when the Canadian and the Indian governments are increasingly fighting, and the Canadian government at least seems to be viewing India as an increasingly hostile actor. So how that factors into all of this, I don't know either.
Sometimes don't you think it's more politics than otherwise? But again, this is not a discussion about politics, and of course there are always going to be different sides to it. But sometimes I feel it is more about politics at that point of time from either side than actual issues that they want to talk about. uh, Sometimes I think they can be discussed on the table and hashed out, but it seems they're more about pointing fingers and getting more media attention. And
Oh,
on
and that
that
was
note,
Justin Trudeau's video, right? Like, it's all
yeah,
politics.
that's what he was trying to do there. But on that note, talking about Mark Miller now for a change, why does he choose to not say anything on Twitter, but only forwards or copies the articles where he has been quoted as saying something? Why wouldn't he say something instead of just quoting those articles of the media?
It makes it very hard to gauge what his perspective on things is, because he will retweet something that is critical almost, or he will tweet something where the line in the article or the quote that he's saying is borderline critical of his own government. Um, and I don't know if it's to give him plausible deniability to say, oh, I wasn't actually sharing my opinion. It's like that whole
Yeah,
thing, right? Retweets aren't endorsements. If he's just
yeah,
retweeting what was said in an article, I've come to the conclusion that it might just be to give him plausible deniability, because sometimes the tweets will be contradictory, um,
they would be, yes.
which is, I when you watch him, do you get the sense that he's enjoying this? This is something actually that I talked about. We had Jason Kenney, former minister, on Borderlines,
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
were
I
talking
heard that
about
one.
how Mark Miller, up until this year, was talking about how he wanted to introduce this program for people without status in Canada.
Yeah,
And like
yeah.
in the summer at some point, he basically said that he was overruled by cabinet. So I get the sense that like Mark, and when he first came into his position, he said, I can't envision a world where we reduce immigration levels. Now that
True.
world is here. So I imagine that Mark Miller is not particularly liking the decision he's making, and he's making them out of, I assume, Prime Minister's office or someone has basically said, here's how it's going to go. Because he said that. He basically said
Mm,
that he was overruled by either cabinet
yeah.
or PMO.
But would he want to be doing it otherwise? Do you get the sense of that he would want to make decisions otherwise than what he's actually doing?
Yeah, I think if they weren't 20 points back in the polls, they would have largely kept kept with what
Continue.
they're doing. I think that what they are doing is very against kind of what the liberal whole paradigm and their way of viewing things is. I think they would much rather be increasing numbers, but they are losing by-elections in areas that they should be winning, largely because
Yeah,
of the perception that the population just grew way too rapidly. And now they're
but
going to
let's
try to
accept
cut
it.
it.
It did. Yeah, but it did grow way too rapidly. I mean, for a country which has a population of only, what, 38, 39% earlier, within a span of less than a year, they grew by 1 million. So, yes, of course, it did grow rapidly, if you
Yeah.
would want to say
I
that.
mean, and I still I want to really learn, in the years to come, whether it was grown deliberately, as some of their press releases said, right? Like when they brought in the Francophone mobility program to include all NOCs, except agriculture, they explicitly said that they were doing that to grow the population, which would grow the economy. So was it done deliberately to try to prevent a recession through population growth, even if that hurt GDP per
Mm,
capita? Was it that they lost control? Still don't know.
yeah. But on that note, the Francophone mobility program, they also did reduce the language requirements from NCLC level 7 to 5,
Yeah, all
basically to
done
encourage
in that
more.
press release explicitly to grow the population. Plus, they have these
Yeah,
Francophone targets that are really going to make life difficult for a lot of people in Canada.
that's a lot of
But
people,
that
yeah.
was done like that. That was the press release that leapt out because it said, we are doing this to grow the economy through population growth. So was that
Yeah.
their focus? And now, as it's clear that GDP per capita is declining, they are abruptly altering course through a plan that doesn't make
But don't you,
mathematical. It's not like their plan is
yeah,
mathematically
it doesn't.
impossible. But yeah.
But don't you think the Francophone suddenly got a push over the last year? I mean, earlier, yes, of course, Francophone agenda was always there to, increase the number of Francophones outside Quebec. But over the last year, it's suddenly as if they went on a overdrive in trying to increase the Francophone outside. All this while that the Liberals have been in I wouldn't say in power, but while they were forming the government, that push was lacking. But suddenly over the last 1 year, was it because they wanted more attention from Quebec? Because you see the Francophone mobility program, the language requirement was reduced. Then in the categories, Francophone category was introduced, of course, and then the student, there's a separate student stream where 37 countries, French-speaking 37 countries, now have a pathway to come to Canada to study, and then also a permanent residence. It's an established PR pathway, right? And only from 37 countries who are French-speaking, minus France. How strange is that
That's
one?
what
But
it's the Francophone program that French people are excluded. France,
uh,
Belgium, a whole bunch of European countries. But yeah,
but surprisingly, isn't it? I mean, why that sudden push? Is it because they
I
wanted more
assume
attention
it's
from
just
Quebec?
effective lobbying. I mean, they've had this goal of 4% Francophones outside of British Columbia. It seems to be based basically to support certain communities as well as some data that they have that bilingual English French people seem to do well in the economy. I mean, I'm from out west, right? Like I'm
Yeah,
further geographically removed from Quebec than you are in Toronto, definitely in
yeah,
Hyderabad. And like eh, I I mean the comment that I think is that, when Pierre Poilievre assumes power, which he seems that he will, by even if he keeps the new reduced numbers the same, if he gets rid of the new quota for Francophones and just reallocates that to international students, he'll be seen as a hero. They are
he
giving
would be.
him a
Yeah,
very easy political win.
yeah, they are in lots of ways. I don't think that's the only area. You'll see many more. But on that note about the political win, uh, now me as a very small level immigration consultant who's just looking at these small numbers that everybody sees, I have been harping, literally screaming. Uh, I mean, basically screaming out my lungs for the last more than a year and a half to 2 years, saying that the number of increasing temporary residents is going to create a problem. Now you can go back and see my
Yeah,
tweets
yeah.
that I've been saying, what's happening. How come nobody out there in the government saw it or made any sense of it? And now
I
they're all
think
scampering. They're all
that it is likely a mix of government moving slow, the liberals hoping it would just, well, government moving slow, and fears of being called racist if you called it out.
Yeah,
I think were the
yeah,
two
yeah.
big ones.
And you won't
And I mean,
attribute
to a
anything to
degree,
the
like
advocacy groups?
the what?
The advocacy groups, the
Yeah, the
community-based
Century
advocacy group?
Initiative, maybe the different, like, this is again something we talked with Jason Kenney about, how as immigration ministry almost only meet groups calling for more immigration. But I think that it was largely like they were, I mean, Mark Miller had that unfortunate, line where he was overheard saying that international students are very lucrative for businesses. So whether it was
Mhm.
that, I think it was largely just like, as I said earlier, I think there's a big paradigm or ideological perspective of the liberals is a more open immigration policy. And I think that they were scared of being called racist if they tried to curtail it.
Okay. Uh, Quebec introduced country-wise cap,
Hmm.
right? And which is being applauded, of course. Do you think in future, do you foresee any kind of country-wise cap being introduced by IRCC across the immigration numbers?
I have a hard time seeing it just because, again, there'll be those accusations of whether it's racial favoritism. Quebec has never been as sensitive to that as the rest of Canada is. Quebec's whole ethos, in a way, is based
Yes,
on
yes,
preservation of culture.
yeah,
Some would argue that the Francophone targets are an indirect way of achieving that because, I mean, I've seen the stats, like, if the concern is that there are too many people coming from India, there are not a lot of people from India coming in the Francophone stream. And
yeah,
the caps, India just does seem to dominates immigration right now. I can't see it fully being capped. I can't see it. Yeah, I think they will achieve it. Whether the schools do that, I mean, who knows, right? Like I have a hard time seeing it. Um,
yeah. But you're
what
right. The
could
schools
impact it?
do.
I mean, like, like with China. I mean, the other thing that's going to occur is they've listed India as being one of these countries that spies on Canada. And so India
Yeah,
now joins a list that currently consists of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. North Korea
yeah,
aside, because there aren't that significant volumes, like Chinese, Iranian, and Russian applicants right now face massive delays.
yeah.
And
They
I've
do.
often
Yeah,
wondered, at some point, will Canadian companies and Canadian schools just start saying, forget it. Like it takes
yeah.
forever. I'm sure you've seen the stats on like the number of mandamus applications
Yes,
being filed
yes.
primarily from people from China and India. Like the delays
Yeah,
are astronomical. And if the addition to that list causes the same thing for applicants from India, that in of itself may
that would be
reduce
huge.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, for Iranian applications, I've seen applications being delayed by 2, 3, 4 years, and that seems to be a norm with them.
Oh yeah. It's same thing for people from China. If they have a STEM background, you just
Yeah.
take whatever the processing time is on the IRCC website and assume it will be triple or quadruple that.
Mm.
But I do have a hard
Okay.
time seeing that there would be an explicit country
Country-wise
cap.
cap.
Yeah.
Okay, fair point. Because the colleges or the institutions do have an unsaid or unspoken rule about which countries they would prefer when trying to recruit. But invariably, majority of the students still happen to be from India.
Yeah.
So they do
I
try
mean,
to
it's
enforce that.
English speaking, right? Like I mean, if you look at like the CEOs of major tech companies in the United States are increasingly from India. Like it's a region that, is rising to become a superpower and produces skilled people. Like it's understandable that the schools would want them.
Yeah. Have you heard of this organization called Edu Canada?
I haven't, or at least it
Okay,
doesn't ring an
so
immediate bell.
no, yeah. I was reading up about this institution. It's called Edu Canada, EDU Canada, and this is a government organization which was established with the sole purpose of promoting the Canadian institutions outside Canada. Which they had an agenda with certain specific countries in Latin America, in Europe itself, but it unfortunately went into India more because they were getting students from that country more. And apparently, it was Edu Canada who had promoted, or rather, who had advocated that the language skills scores should be reduced when inviting applicants under the SDS stream. And very recently, I've seen one advocacy paper from again Edu Canada, where they are now insisting that the colleges should reduce their language skills requirements so that they can attract more students from India. And
I mean, I
sometimes you
think that's the
wonder
type of
that,
stuff that's on the way out. Like, there's not
I
going to
mean,
be
and
any
this is,
buy-in for that right now.
but this is the government. This is the government organization, and obviously there must be some agenda. There must be something that these guys are aware of in terms of what are they looking to promote. Why would you reduce the language skills proficiency requirement in a college and an institution, and then bring in the students who are facing difficulty in comprehending what they should be studying and how they're studying, and then later on again complaining that we do not have students who can communicate very well in English,
Yeah.
when the institution itself is a Canadian government institution.
Yeah. I mean, well, I like, there's just this perspective that all the schools and all programs in Canada need to be filled. I was speaking with someone in the education industry, and they were saying, well, let's say that, there's a school in northern British Columbia that has 10 spots and can only fill it with 2 domestic students. Shouldn't they have to, like, wouldn't we want 8 foreign nationals, regardless of where they're from, to come in just to fill that class so the program can run? And my perspective was, well, no,
Hmm.
those 2 students can go to another city. But there is that,
Yeah.
perspective that seems to be out there. It's kind of like, the whole foreign worker program is predicated on the idea that, like, we can't let businesses fail because of lack of labor at a certain wage, so we have to bring in workers. There seems to be a similar perception in the schools that's like, we can't let a single school fail, although now a lot of the, diploma mills, as Mark Miller, fails, but there's this perception that, like, every public school must have all their programs completely filled. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, in terms of, I just like saw some of the comments. There's quite a lot of people asking, is Canada still safe for Indian immigrants? I don't know how wide, like, is that a wide perception right now that in India that Canada's not safe?
So I've been now in Hyderabad, and I'm going to Mumbai, and earlier I was in Delhi and then in Rajasthan as well. And I think it's the media. It's in media in Canada, it's the media in India that have sensationalized the whole subject. And in India, Canada obviously is the evil party, and in Canada, India is the evil party, and that's how it is being projected. And it's so strange when people ask this question, that as an Indian, don't you feel scared in Canada that somebody is going to do something to you? And I'm like, why would that happen? So yeah, I think it's the media, the way they are projecting the whole issue, and of course that's what sells, right? Sensationalism. But no, of course not. I mean, yes, you do have those incidents, and of course certain cities, and I'm not going to name them, I'm sure people already know, and they will start commenting and saying, okay, these are the cities. But there are certain cities, and there are a couple of cities in BC, there are cities in Ontario that are known to have these incidents more often than not. uh, and somehow it's Indians at the forefront there as well. And as I was saying earlier, and that's how the whole community gets branded
Yeah.
as the ones that who are causing all this ruckus. uh, but on that note, uh, when the international students and the numbers of the international students are obviously going to drop, right? That's what the whole idea
Hmm.
from Mark Miller and the liberals at this point of time is, to reduce the numbers. And obviously the numbers are reducing. Obviously Indians, and obviously I've been talking to a lot of people who are into the same business of study abroad, as they call it here. The interest is waning, obviously, yeah, because the SDS stream closed down, the whole thing with the visit visas, I mean, though it's not a big deal, but the whole thing with it's how it is projected by the media, as if everything is, and the Canada is shutting door kind of thing. But people are less interested as far as Canada is concerned, and those numbers will reduce. We're already hearing reports of certain colleges, who are now saying that they might have to close doors because
Hmm.
they're going to face deficits. How badly is it going to impact so many of them? And do you really think some of these colleges are going to just sort of shut shop?
Well, the private ones will shut shop. That diploma mill that Mark Miller described in Surrey, the school above the day massage parlor, is now a grocery store.
Yeah,
So that school did shut. Actually, I
yeah,
get emails, I'm sure you do too, of DLIs, designated learning institutes, that are for sale.
yeah.
Will the public schools
Yes.
close? Probably not. Uh, I mean, they can always, I assume they'll be bailed out by the taxpayer before they close, or tuitions will have to rise, right? Like, there's going to be unintended consequences of reducing international student money into the system. And that will presumably be either increased taxes for other people or higher domestic tuition.
It's a strange one because Ontario, and Doug Ford especially, they basically cut off the funding that was being extended to the public institutions and the universities and the colleges, because they knew that they were making big money out of the international students. Do you think now that will go back to extending the funding again? Because I don't see these institutions surviving very long
Nope,
without the
or
international
deficit
students,
or
or
new
rather the
funding.
reviews.
I mean, Doug Ford doesn't want any international medical students. So either the cost of that will have to go way up. I mean, the other one that's interesting, imagine everyone did the Quebec model, where Quebec is considering using the notwithstanding clause to force
Yeah,
graduates of medical schools to stay in the province. Imagine
that
how
would be
many
interesting.
people, how many international students would love the ability to come to Vancouver or Montreal, I guess in that case, study, and be told by the
Yeah,
government, we will make sure that you stay in Canada.
yeah.
Like, there's, like, we really are going to miss out with these caps on some bright people. On the other hand, I mean, maybe with the international student caps, the approval rates will go up. I'm really curious to see what will happen with the workers, because I don't see how the cap on foreign workers or the international mobility program especially will work. Like, the numbers don't,
But
the numbers are impossible.
I agree with you. But okay, let's expand this a bit further. So obviously, international students were also seen as a source of cheap labor, right? Sean Fraser said it. Marco Mendicino said it. Mark Miller obviously also managed to blurt it out at the wrong time. Uh, what's going to happen when that cheap labor is no longer available? I know there are a lot of Canadians who are quite ecstatic about it because they feel that the wages will go up. But will businesses want to pay a hospitality server $30 an hour versus 15 what they're paying now?
Or they'll just automate. But I mean, the big box stores, right? Like, there is such a big glut right now. You see the videos on TikTok of hundreds of people lined up for like a few positions at a Walmart. I have a
Yeah,
friend who works in a pretty senior position at one of those big box stores. And the big box stores weren't calling for a record number of international students. They just like noticed that there was this huge pool. And whether, wages aren't going to soar if it's right now, like, say there's 200 applicants for one job, it's going to go to 50 applicants for one job. There still probably will be this like surplus of people, because the numbers are a reduction, but it's not
yeah.
massive enough, in my opinion, to really impact, whether to really cause wage increases. But we'll see. I mean, I could be wrong on that. Like, will it be less suppressed?
No,
Sure.
you're right.
But 200
You're right.
people for a
You're
job
right
versus
about it.
50 for a job, I think there will still be a surplus of people looking for work, because, I mean, the other thing kind of behind all this is it's not clear what the plan to grow the economy itself really
Hmm.
is, and to have more jobs. right? We're talking about cutting the number of
But
people applying for jobs. There doesn't seem to be really a plan to create jobs that any government has really put out. Certainly, there's no plan for immigrant entrepreneurs to come and
there
hire
isn't.
people
There
to
isn't.
create those jobs.
I mean, I never thought within the last 9 years that this government had any plan for that matter. I mean, if you see the way things were happening. Uh, but now that you mention it, and that's a good point, why is Canada worse as far as entrepreneurs are concerned? I mean, 2014, you had the last federal entrepreneur program. I know some people had earlier commented that there was a lot of fraud and misuse with the entrepreneur programs. But then that fraud and misuse is there with all programs. So why completely go averse as far as the entrepreneur programs are going? Even now, startup is pretty much done. I wouldn't say done, but yeah, it's on the way down. Self-employed streams closed down. The PN provincial nominee programs, as far as the entrepreneur streams are concerned, they're pretty much dead, if nothing else. Very difficult for somebody to get through. The owner operator program was misused, used, but that still made a lot of people start businesses. Uh, do you think there is a case to be made that they should actually start looking at entrepreneur programs again? Because if nothing else, that can be regulated in a better manner. Look at the US. They have the EB5 program where the business has to have a $1 million net worth. I mean, the worth to start, and then they have to create at least 10 jobs. If it is regulated well, don't you think that could bring a lot of value to Canada?
Yeah, I mean, there used to be an entrepreneur program where entrepreneurs had terms and conditions that they had to follow, and they could be removed from Canada through an IAD hearing if they didn't fulfill those terms and conditions. I can't see us going back to that. I think that they struggle with is that, like, there's a certain subjective nature with starting a business, right? The business plan, which IRCC, we can see in all the decisions, has a hard time assessing the genuineness of applicants who are doing those plans. But yeah, right. Like they would need, I think, to be willing to, for at least people who are here and have started business right now, you don't even get Canadian experience points for it. So
Hmm.
it's very hard right now. And I mean, it's not going to be any easier. Like one of the impacts, this is why I think the plans in part are mathematically impossible, but like as part of what is now capped, even though there aren't supposed to be
Yeah,
caps, like this is part of where it's just not going to work. But like theoretically, CUSMA/NAFTA permits are capped. Entrepreneur
yeah,
work permits are capped. I have no idea how
yeah.
these caps will work in practice. Like if they're reaching it come September, are they just going to say, okay, no new hires till the new year? And it's,
Hmm.
if anything, in terms of like the creation of jobs, this is going to be just I don't actually think they're going to go through with the caps, or they're going to find a way around it through some sort of stats manipulation. But if they do, the administrative red tape on businesses to say like, I mean, just imagine a world where I think this is what we have to be prepared for as practitioners or representatives is like, it's a world where either the caps are going to be not met through stats manipulation, or to achieve them, the refusal rates are going to have to soar, or we're going to be in this weird
Hmm.
world where come September, they're just like, oh, that's it. We've hit our cap. Like, no more permits. Kind of like when the express entry ITAs just stop. Um, and what world they choose. And then it's going to be like, okay, if we're in a world where there's these caps and they do plan on hitting them, all of a sudden mandamus is going to be like super important because you want to get in
The
before the
delay.
cap, right? Like it's
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
is going to
yeah.
get really, but yeah, if they actually do follow through with the caps on work permit holders, which I just have such a hard time seeing how it will be implemented,
Yeah.
especially like I've said, the numbers are they mathematically don't work. Like I think their target is, let me pull open the levels plan for the international mobility program in 2025, 2025 is 285,000 people. And they also say that asylum claimant volumes are included in the overall methodology. So like, what do we have? Like if all these people are actually claiming asylum, you're going to get down to what, 100,000, 150,000. Then you got to get the post-grad work permits, all the free trade agreements. So
Yeah.
I think part of where, I mean, they say it only applies to new arrivals, so maybe they're going to exempt all the people who are here.
For making
But
a
like, what do
claim.
you do with your Americans? You know, like for general business flows, you have people who, and we get this for American clients all the time. They come for like a week every 2 months as a
Yeah,
management consultant. They get a 3-year work permit. Is that
true.
going to be capped now? Are we just saying that trade between Canada and the US will slow? Like these numbers don't work unless they take them
Okay.
out of the international mobility program and just figure out some other
Which is
program.
going to be a difficult, yeah, which is going to be difficult. But do you do you really believe you're going to see a bigger number of refugee claimants inflow with Trump taking into the coming into the office in January?
Who knows? I mean, in 2017, the inflows started because, well, at least we're encouraged on in some way because the prime minister tweeted that everyone fleeing persecution or something, Canada would welcome them. They are not tweeting the same at the start of the Trump second presidency. The same, like it's hard to know what actually Trump will do. Um, there is a video going around, and I think it's a video, it's a bit inaccurate, but it kind of summarizes the current mentality that I think it was Ben Shapiro, who's like a conservative commentator in the US with millions of followers, retweeted a news story about how record Americans will go to Canada. And it's got this
Yeah,
image on
true.
top of it of Pierre Poilievre eating an apple, which has become
Yeah,
the
I've seen
symbol
that.
of his like anti-woke media commentary image that he's portraying. And Canada,
Yeah,
if they come here, there isn't really a program that would facilitate them either. So we'll see what happens. I actually think that's just as possible that there's going to be, I mean, as all of this is going on, we talked about how, and you mentioned how in the past several years, job creation hasn't been at the forefront. There's a record number of Canadians moving to the United States.
they are. Yes,
So, it's going to be difficult times ahead. I don't know what I mean, and talking about the business scene, like the immigration levels plan calls for 1 to 2 million current foreign workers essentially to leave.
to
What will
leave.
that look
Yes.
like for businesses, right? Like it's going to be
Yeah,
the red tape and hurdle and intrusion of the government is going to
yeah.
be
Now we are
massive
now.
if it all goes ahead.
Yeah, so now we are coming to the meatier part of today's session, and I was saving the best for the last because I know a lot of people want us to talk about express entry. They want us to talk about STEM category draws. But before I get to that, of course, we will talk about that. I mean, that always is the most interesting subject. But before we get to that, and obviously you've already started this subject, but do you really think they would be able to remove 1.2 million temporary residents from Canada in 2025? At least
No,
that's the number that's been projected. And how would they do that? I mean, there are so many undocumented people in Canada, and there are also so many failed refugee claimants who refuse to leave. I haven't seen CBSA rounding them up and putting them on the flight. So,
no, there's
do you
no
really
state
think they
that
will
has
be able
that.
to get?
I mean, Mark Miller recently said that they would be dedicating increased resources to it. Bear in mind right now that I'm not sure which provinces still have agreements with the feds to detain immigrants in provincial jails, right? Over the last couple of years, it seems every province was ending their agreements with CBSA.
They did.
Yeah, so like I
Yeah, they
don't
did.
where's going to be the willingness to actually go through with removing people? And Mark Miller, like just this week, said that the plan for mass regularization of people without status is on hold until the
Yes.
next election. So again, like it
Yes.
becomes very hard. How do you advise people who are here and that even before the next election, they may still regularize the status of people who are without status in Canada if they're working in critical fields. So it becomes very difficult to tell people like who are without status, A, you should stop working. B, you should leave because the government keeps hinting that they're going to
Yeah.
regularize status.
Yeah.
Um, and just to note, like, I noticed that in the comments, some people have been saying, why are people in this one comment from India say is taking, what they call useless non-STEM, non-healthcare jobs to get a job and then asking for PR. And it's because traditionally, those were the programs that led to PR, right? Like when some of these people came here to start studying, there was no distinction between non-STEM, non-healthcare. The government
There
actively
wasn't.
promoted these different programs. And the classic example that we give is like British Columbia has a stream for food counter attendants, an immigration stream for food counter attendants,
They do. Yes.
dedicated stream for that. And there is no dedicated stream for the people who own that Starbucks franchise, or I don't know if or like the people who own businesses, there's no stream. So it's
Yeah.
not that like, you know, all these people went into fields and jobs knowing that they would have labor problems and that they would be in this difficult situation and that demand the opportunity to immigrate. The government created incentives for specific actions that people followed. Um, and now there is a bit of gaslighting to try to say that they never did that. But if you go into like, if you set your Google search and you limit it so that there's no results before essentially 2022, 2023, there was you come to Canada, you study, all fields essentially are treated the same way. And that's the type
Yeah.
of immigrant that we want. And that's why people did it. Why did people come here to Tim Hortons or any other fast food chain in British Columbia? Because there's a specific program for the food counter attendants. People were just responding to
Yeah.
what was like presented to them. And now
What
they're
was
trying to
actually?
pull the rug out from under them and pretend that there was never a rug. Like, oh, I totally get why people are pissed and
I mean, but
marching.
then there are people on both sides, right? There are people who absolutely abhor the way things are going at this point of time, and then look at the international students. I mean, I know they are right now being demonized by the media, by people. I mean, you go on social media, the kind of comments you see sometimes they're I mean, they are antagonizing. But at the same point of time, uh, the international students, are they really to be blamed? I mean, they did buy into the promise, right? Even today I was just looking at the X account, the Twitter account of IRCC, where they're still talking, they're still promoting express entry, and they're still saying Canada needs skilled workers, and why don't you create your express entry profile and come to Canada? So earlier, when the narrative from Marco Menticino, Sean Fraser was so clear, saying that you come to Canada and you study and we would want you to stay. So when you're saying it in those those clear terms, and then they did a TR to PR, then they did an express entry draw of 75 CRS. They were actually saying it out. I mean, not in direct terms, but saying it out anyways. That you come, you study, that the chances are you are definitely going to become a permanent resident. And now, when it's not happening, and the hundreds and thousands of international students, they are feeling cheated. Uh, where do they go? What do they do?
I have no idea what they're going to do. I feel terrible for them. I mean, if you're in British Columbia on your postgraduate work permit, earning, say, I don't know, 50,000 out of school, and the government comes in and says, that's it, no more LMIAs unless you earn $34 an hour, and it's about 72,000 right now is the LMIA cutoff because of the increase in what counts as high wage. Um, and your employer can't afford it. You need that LMIA for PR because they've cut PR. Then it's really tricky. And what is frustrating is the government let it get away from them, either deliberately or they did let it get away from them. And for political reasons, they feel the need to shut the door. And they aren't, they had to decide, are they going to shut the door just to newcomers or regularize the status, of people who are not regularized, but like let the people who are here stay permanently, reduce newcomers, but at least let the people who came and who are working stay. And they've decided that, at least their plan is that they'll all leave, which will, for
It's going to be
businesses, for
interesting.
people, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. Of all the people who have managed to get a lot of experience doing different kinds of jobs, and now what happens to those employers who are going to leave, who are going to lose out on those employees because those guys have to leave because their work permits are expiring, they don't have a pathway, and the employers are now losing out on those very
Yeah,
valuable
I mean, that for me
resources.
is like, the administrative cost of this to businesses basically we're saying that it's presented as, the government uses like the non-permanent resident outflow will be blah, blah, blah. They use these like very bureaucratic terms. We've presented it as 1 to 2 million, foreign workers will have to leave. The convert, like from the business perspective, it's 1 to 2 million employers will have to lose 1 to 2 million employees and replace them. And what kind of drag that is
Yeah.
on the economy, I don't know. Again, I'm not convinced that the plan will unfold that
It's
way.
not
I don't
the
know
plan's
if
going to
there'll be
work.
this
Yeah.
mass, the way the minister talks, it's like, hey, make it to the next election, and then we'll just, if you're at a status, we'll regularize you once we're back in. So I don't know.
Yeah. Let's see how that one goes. Okay, now for the most interesting subject. You obviously saw the immigration levels plan 2025, the big hullabaloo about slashing 100,000 people. I didn't see that slash in the federal high skilled category. Actually, there was an increase in the federal high skilled category. The slash actually came largely with the PNPs. Did you also get that feeling that the provinces were being punished for not taking in the refugees that Mark Miller wanted to resettle?
I don't know if I mean, they all got cut. So I don't know. There's, it's going to be one of those things where years down the road, we're going to have to learn sort of like what caused them to cut PMP by 60%. And there's different theories out there. It could be the refugee levels. It could be something to do with Quebec. And if Quebec was cutting their numbers, that the feds wanted some ratio of what the provinces can select vis-a-vis Quebec, because Quebec is like cutting immigration seriously.
They are. They
Um,
actually
and
closed
it
both their
could just
program.
be that that they want to try to make CEC as big as possible. So in order to do that, they had to reduce the PMP. It could be that they weren't confident. It could be, because I heard grumblings about this in the media at least, that they wanted the provinces to do Francophone draws, and certain provinces said no. And so in order to make
Yeah.
way for Francophone targets, they needed to do they needed to reduce it somewhere. And so to hit their Francophone targets, they're not, I mean, I actually think that may be the most likely explanation, is that they aren't confident that the provinces will bring out programs for Francophones, and they need space to do Francophone draws. I know Ontario has a
Because I,
Francophone draws, or at least
yeah,
one.
they do
BC
draws.
doesn't.
Yeah.
British Columbia is.
BC, yeah, BC certainly. Because I was quite surprised. I would have thought that provinces were better suited to choose the people that should come to their provinces based on their individual labor market priorities. So I mean, the type of people that Newfoundland and Labrador needs, not necessarily Ontario needs the same kind of people. Not necessarily British Columbia needs the similar kind of people. So they can all choose the kind of people that they want. But with
I
this
would
slash,
bet that it's to make space for Francophones. If I had to put money on what it is, it's that they weren't confident that the provinces would get Francophone programs in place, and that there may even have been provinces that vocally asked why they were being asked to do this.
yeah.
And that would be my speculation, but that would be my guess.
Okay, so while we are on this call, I think there was just a draw. And for some reason, I'm not able to refresh and see the draw, but I'm sure everybody else who is watching us, they would be able to see the draw. Apparently, there's a draw, CEC, Canadian Experience Class draw at 539. I don't have the exact details because I think I will need to clear my cache memory before I can see that draw. But
539.
talking about, can you see it? Because
Oh no, I
for
haven't
some reason I haven't.
loaded it. I remember when it was the draws used to all be in the low fours. And then when it went up to 470, people thought this is nuts. This is going to have to come back down. And it did come down if you're
Okay,
Francophone.
I'm just going to pull out the draw. I see it now. Yes, just give me a moment till I get this. Stop sharing, present my screen again. Okay, window. Is it this one? No, need to switch off this. Sorry about that. Just gonna quickly pull this up. Okay, so what do you think is happening with Express Entry? It's pretty strange. Again, today's draw. All right, so now we have it on the screen. This is Canadian Experience class. 400 invitations issued. 400. Suddenly, do you think somebody at the IRCC is missing out on zero there at the end? This one, this one is CRS score of 539. Surprise draw yesterday with the PNP. I mean, we were not expecting a draw for another week, but they did conduct a draw yesterday, and now again today we have another one. What do you think is going on with IRCC? Why suddenly we are seeing these 400s, 500s kind of draws? Any kind of an insight on that one, Stephen?
Oh, they've just met. Like they've probably just met some target and they're keeping it. I would imagine. I mean, the levels plan. I don't think the levels plan in October was the levels plan that they had in September or August. And I would think that as everybody recalibrates, things will need to slow down as the exact implications of the plan is presented. And the reason that, like you can think of why the levels plan was a bit of a political pivot. A, again, they were talking about regularizing status. B, there was stuff on the IRCC website about introducing a permanent resident stream in the regulations for tier 4 and 5. That's nowhere in
Yeah,
the 2025-2027 levels plan.
yeah, don't see it.
And as recently as in the summer, you had the deputy prime minister and different people just saying like the immigration levels are fine, and they were kind of in denial about everything. So like, I think that I would imagine that draws will remain low as they kind of figure out exactly what their new targets are going to be for 2025 and how it will work.
I sort of had a feeling that the levels plan and the number of invitations that they do issue out, excuse me, those are different in the sense of, and I personally feel that when they did start conducting the draws for the Canadian Experience class in 2024, if you remember, we managed to get hold of the ATIP notes from April, where there was a percentage allocation of different categories in Express Entry. And there was no mention of Canadian Experience class. There was just a mention of the general categories. And it's only after that, after one of the Mark Miller announcements where he said that it's about time that they start looking at the domestic draws, only after that did you start seeing the Canadian Experience class draws happening. I know you love Canadian Experience class draws.
Yeah.
I know that. Last year you were just rooting for them, but they didn't happen. But this year, after
well, I think the levels
onwards, there's
plan
only
is
been Canadian
essentially
Experience.
Canadian experience class and categories. There's barely room
It
for
is. It is.
federal skilled worker. And I wouldn't be surprised if they only do federal skilled worker if they're able to do regional draws so that they're only inviting federal skilled workers who are inside Canada. And that kind of targets the entrepreneurs who are here. Although there's this whole big issue of like, can a entrepreneur get 50 or 200 points for arranged employment is kind of still being worked out. But that would be my prediction, is that there's not going to be a federal skilled worker draw until there's a way to ensure that it's only people inside Canada.
I mean, after they introduce the postal code field in the Express Entry profile, I'm sure they're now going to be able to do that. But look at the numbers, 501 to 600, it just continues to grow, 16,495. I can already imagine the kind of comments that can start coming through, that these are the people who are buying LMIAs. I'm not going to get into that debate of buying and selling. I mean, it's all fraudulent, and everybody knows that they shouldn't be doing it. But for some reason, people just don't give enough credit to the fact that there are lots and lots of people in Canada who do study masters. They do have experience outside Canada, they do have experience inside Canada, and they are able to score quite well in their English
Oh yeah,
language
like
proficiency there.
if you're under 26, 27, you have a master's, you did your schooling in Canada, um, and you have 1 year of Canadian work experience, that gets you into the fives. If you're fluent in English,
Yeah,
and you're young with skilled work, like that gets you into the fives. It's all the people
yeah,
who just have the bachelor's or just slightly less than fluent who are kind of
true.
stuck. I mean, the
So
other
that's
thing
something.
to
I mean,
note is that, like, I mean, yeah, that 450. I mean, like, you know, before 2015, it was 1 year skilled work experience. That was it. Like for most of the conservative era, there was no points system in the Canadian experience class, and there was, people like I remember when the 75 point draw happened in express entry, all sorts of commentators were like, "Oh, they're just taking anybody now. Like, look at the Liberals." And no, like that's how it was before. All they did, it was just a reversion to the pre 2015, to the 2011 to 2015 era of the Canadian experience class. Like
yeah, you just had to
it's
score
it's
67
so
points. That's all.
tough right now compared to what it was just 10 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
um, there are a lot of skilled people who don't get a lot of CRS points. And like people who are in Canada who would be perfectly fine immigrants who don't get a lot of CRS points. It's all very arbitrary in my opinion, especially with the issue of like the LMIA, the requirement of the LMIA and the closed work permits for points. It's yeah. But in this era where they need to find ways to cap applicants, it's it's how they've chosen to do it.
Let me ask you this question, and I know this is going to bring on some comments as well. Do you think that IRCC should do away with giving points for LMIA, because that will completely wipe out that aspect of LMIA?
Yes, 100%. Um,
Okay. Because before
Especially if
2016,
LMIAs are going to take 8, 9 months,
yeah,
100%.
I'm not sure if you remember, in November 2016, or before, prior to November 2016, an LMIA could give you 600 points. Okay, so that was like a done deal. If you have an LMIA, it gives you 600 points and you get through. It was only in November 2016 that they changed the points for LMIAs to 50 and 200. Uh, so do you think this is gonna? Do you think
So
that could
here's why
be
I'll
a
say
possibility?
that the LMIA and just so arranged employment, well, arranged employment historically for the comprehensive ranking system is based on Section 82 of the regs, which is part of the federal skilled worker program. The federal skilled worker program was historically people who were outside of Canada. So they got these arranged employment points because they were outside of Canada. It wasn't clear if they would be able to get a job inside Canada. The LMIA was a way of saying, okay, this person will be able, like they have a job. It's arranged employment, right? That's the whole idea. You get points for arranged employment. There used to be the AEO, then it was just the LMIA. But the idea was people who are outside Canada would be more likely to establish themselves inside Canada if they had a job lined up. I don't think that functions well in the world of the Canadian experience class where people already have Canadian experience points. And all the LMIA is kind of showing is which employers are willing to go through the hassle. It's more an evaluation of like, are employers willing to go through the hassle than it is of the individual's skills. There's whole sectors, banking, accounting, a lot of the big firms, like they don't provide
They don't even
support for this
LMIA.
stuff, in part because the other change has been this compliance regime. So should where if you get a closed work permit, you're subject to this onerous compliance regime. Should is someone's likely value to the Canadian future and their ability to economically establish, should that be based on whether they find an employer who's going to go through the administrative hassle of getting an LMIA? I don't think so. I think there's other ways. Like if they want to rank jobs, it's going to be controversial as well, but they could do it by wage. They do it to a degree by occupation. I don't think the LMIA or a closed work permit should determine this, especially, and two more reasons. A, you have this issue of like, it's tied to the foreign worker program. So all these people who just need
Yeah,
LMIAs for points are getting lumped in with the foreign worker program. And B,
they are.
you have these bizarre situations, and I've represented and sat across the table. I'm sure you have too, of people who are experiencing abuse from their employer on their closed work permit. They have an option to get a
Yeah,
1-year vulnerable open work permit. But if they get that work permit, then they won't get the points
they
anymore for
lose.
their permanent
Yeah, they lose.
residency. So we're almost trapping them with the abusive employer.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
And
that's a
Jonathan's
difficult one,
asking,
right?
why don't we just stop all draws and only let provinces nominate? That would be giving up control. I think Kubeir and I both agree that provinces should have much more control, but the feds disagree.
But not all of it.
And actually,
But
there's
not
a
all of
history
it.
with some provincial nominee programs of so that, I mean, part of the issue there is going to be some of the provinces have poor retention. So you'd be having these provinces essentially dictate what other provinces could do if it was exclusively up to them. And then some
Yeah,
provinces, like if the history of the PEI immigration program is, I mean, there's
that's
no
not
easy
good.
answer, I guess.
There is. There isn't. There isn't. Okay, so the last one. I mean, it can never be a last one, but let's see if I can have something else after this one. What happened to STEM? I mean, when I mean, last no, a year before the last, was it last? Sean Fraser was so pumped up with during the collision conference, and he came out and he announced so many new measures to attract the STEM talent into Canada, the tech talent into Canada. And then he was gone, and Mark Miller came, and now the new levels plan, the 2025 levels plan, somehow have missed STEM in the categories. As of right now, the categories that are mentioned in the target level plan, it's the 25 level plan, are only healthcare and trades. No mention of transport, no mention of agriculture, and as many people were shocked, no mention of STEM. What do you think is going on there?
Well, there's a few possibilities. It could be a typo. There's no way for sure of like,
Yeah,
right? Like, who
that would be
knows, right?
nice.
It's impossible to know. It could just be that they were rushing it and there's a typo. It could be that there was a recession in STEM. Um, and it could just be that they needed to make way for Francophones.
Hmm.
And maybe they're hoping the provinces will pick up the slack on STEM and ask the same question. It is like, I mean, the other thing about STEM, and it kind of does summarize in a way, how do I put this? A feature of this government, at least in recent years, of big expectations and then the bubble, the balloon slowly deflates. Like you talked about Sean Fraser with his global tech strategy, and they were talking about an
Yeah,
innovation stream. And I've read the briefing notes where they
they
were
were.
talking about, maybe all of STEM would get open occupational work permits to work for any employer. There was all this hype
Yeah,
about the innovation stream. And then when it was announced, it was LMIA exempt work permits for 8 companies across the country. And it was just like, like disappointment. And that, like, I just feel like it really does symbolize, yeah, kind of the
but
disappointing arc of
just like
things.
Yeah, just like for some reason STEM was ignored in this one. Do you think tier 4 and tier 5 announcement that Mark Miller made, that is going to happen, or is it going to dwindle away?
Well, Mark Miller would say, well, you need to wait until the next election, which is, I think, like, it's very weird framing because I don't think, if I'm the conservatives, I would be taking that line and say, although they don't want to position themselves too strong on immigration, but like, you would just say, look, he has said, this is paused until the election. After the election, they're going to go back to these big immigration programs. So I think tier 4 and 5 is out, except for maybe, if you take Mark Miller at his word, there could be critical labor shortages in certain areas where they will regularize the status of people. I've
Yeah,
ranted enough before about how if you're a construction worker legally working in Toronto, there's no immigration program,
you
but
could.
if you're
Yeah,
working illegally, there's a program.
there is a
So
program. Yes.
we may see little niche things, but I think that they
Yeah,
are so under the microscope on this topic and are going to be under such pressure to
yeah,
hit
they're on
these
eggshells.
targets that I can't see. Well, I don't know. Right after they announced their levels plan and caps on the IMP, they introduced open like measures for people in Lebanon. So
Yeah,
I think it's going to just be very interesting to watch because they have these strict targets that go against some of what
I don't.
this government stands for. Like, what are they going to say that, as people protest for more work permits or more immigration from different conflict zones, are they going to say, hey, we've got our strict targets? Like, I think it will be
Yeah,
hard for this government to do that.
to do that. But I mean, at the same point of time, I find it very hard for this government to be able to withstand any new headline which says Canada is now opening up new pathways for PR or has introduced new immigration routes for tier 4 or tier 5. Maybe they would want to avoid that situation, right?
Or people just going to the media saying, we've been in Canada, we were a student, we're at a status where we were working, we can't extend. CBSA is coming to deport. Like, they've been traditionally sensitive to those media stories. Um, there could be, there won't be, but like hypothetically, if the government plans on 1 to 2 million people leaving, there could be a lot of stories like that. And I don't know if this government has the wherewithal to withstand that media pressure.
Hmm, interesting.
Like, it's
Okay, so just now to sort of wind today's session up, what do you think 2025 is looking like? I mean, I know personally this is what I feel, and then I would let you sort of pitch in there as well. I feel that the next 2 years are going to be a bit kind of a lay low situation because conservatives as of right now haven't really made any specific statement with their plan for immigration. They have just always had a rhetoric as far as immigration is concerned, and they've always played offensive to whatever Trudeau has to say. So they haven't really set out their agenda or their plan for immigration. I personally, in my opinion, I think that for the next couple of years immigration is just going to lay low because Canada cannot do without immigration in the long run because our birth rate is just not high enough. And therefore, immigration will make a return probably in a couple of years when there is a distinct shortage of labor, if you would want to call that. But until that time, it's going to be a tough going.
well, there won't be a
What are
shortage
your
of
thoughts?
labor when all the Americans flee. The big thing is in the next 2 years, there has to be an election. It's set for sometime in the fall in 2025. I think they can push that back until 2026 if they're desperate. The next by-election is December 16 in Langley. So I would imagine there'll be
Yeah.
another set of immigration announcements if they lose that one as well. I think that they're like I think that 2025 on PR targets will probably be essentially what they are. I think there are going to be I don't see all these people leaving. I think businesses will protest loud enough that there'll be some sort of a stats manipulate. I think 2025 could be the year of stats manipulation. And what I mean by that is Okay, like right now they're saying that asylum claimants will form part of the international mobility or part of the international mobility program. Maybe they just say that they can work without a work permit under Section 186. Maybe all these intracompany transfers are able to start working without work permits under Section 186. Maybe they announce that the Ukrainians can work without work permits under Section 186. And they start introducing work permit exempt categories in order to let people still live here and work here without them being part of the stats. That's kind of my dark horse prediction, because otherwise the numbers, they're mathematically impossible. Like if asylum claimants are in there, as are the PGWPs, that's essentially the international mobility program is going to be met right there. And they obviously are still going to have open spousals, spouses of students in some cases, international free trade agreements, significant benefit. Like the people are going to need to come. We just entered, I think, I haven't read it yet, but like there's a new free trade agreement with Indonesia that has labor
There
mobility
is, yeah.
provisions. So like,
Yeah.
That's going to be another part of the international mobility program that's about to grow. So the numbers, they're going to have to find a way to make these numbers work. And what that would be my prediction, is that there's some sort of something that happens with stats manipulation, just because, and again, the other one to note, they're very careful in the 2025-2027 levels plan to say new arrivals, and the cap will apply to new arrivals. And so there may be stuff like, in theory, if it only applies to new arrivals, they could extend the status of people here without breaching their plan. So I think it'll be a year of like figuring out ways to walk back some of this plan without actually changing the words, because that's just politics.
But
Or the plan
there is
changes,
still
right?
one.
Like in 2024, they had a plan. We had a plan. It was 3 years. That plan's gone. Now they'll be in like,
Yeah.
this
But
plan will be, these
the
3-year
numbers
plans are
are
as good as they, until the next thing happens and they switch the plan.
of the changes that were announced but not implemented yet, I haven't seen anything on the RNIP. I have yet to see something on the RCIP or the RNIP, RCIP, same thing there. Tier 4, Tier 5, still haven't heard. And then there is another one which is about, I'm not sure when they will announce it, that the spouse open work permits of work permit holders in Canada, spouses of work permit holders in Canada. That's also going to be another big change, which is going to impact a lot of people. I'm not sure how they're going to implement it, but that one is also going to impact a lot of people out there.
That'll be a big one. I mean, they could just go back to it's only for high skilled workers. They made it sound like they're going to go even stricter than what it was before that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, right? I mean, they had actually identified certain categories or occupations, but that's going to be a very difficult one to sort of comprehend the way they've defined it.
Yeah, I mean, especially when they broadened it, I mean, again, this is the liberals, right? They came out with supporting families. We don't want to like divide skill and non-skill. All foreign workers deserve to have their families with them. They came out with all these like statements that they're now going to have to essentially say, screw them. Like I like that change is going to be, I mean, I think the next one they're going to have to look at is like the asylum claims. I don't know what they're going to do there, but like that's what will throw off. I think the Globe and
A
Mail
lot of people,
actually had an article saying that instead of going first come first serve, they should be fast tracking all the new ones, with the assumption that there's a lot of malified ones.
yeah. Okay, so the big ones, I mean, and I just want you to sort of very quickly give me snippets and your insight onto before, I mean, as a wrap up, refugee claimants, or the number of claimants that are increasing, including the international international students, with the mind, keeping in mind that there are about 250,000 in the backlog, and the expected timelines going up to more than 4.5, 5 years now. Second, the removal of 1.2 million people. I know you've already said, but I'm just going to ask you to wrap them up very quickly. Number three, what can people look forward to in terms of, is there going to be any relief? And then we will call it a day.
I think it's well, like December. Mark it in your calendar. December 16, next by-election. Close enough to Christmas that they may just leave it. I think it's. I think the reality is that I've talked about how there'll probably be some stats, ways to manipulate the stats on the international mobility program for the ability of companies to hire foreign workers, students to study here, visitors to come here, because we talked about it a little bit, but like I think there's an issue of people coming and then claiming asylum. I think that this government is 20 points back in the polls, and we've seen how they have had to really backtrack, and it's almost all around this issue, right? Like they tinkered with the carbon tax a bit in the Maritimes pretty cynically, but like it's all on this issue. It probably will continue, especially as like asylum claims likely continue to increase. They are 20 points back, and I think that as they get more and more desperate, they will either replace Trudeau, which seems difficult, or things are going to get more and more and more strict as the election nears and they remain back in the polls. The most likely thing that will occur is that things get tougher and tougher as they need to show that the numbers are coming down. Somewhere in there, houses are going to have to get built. But because that's kind of the other side of this, is that like
that's what they've been
sort of
promising.
Presumably what is the I think the parliamentary budget officer said that even with the plan the way it is, I mean, this is sort of like the political difficulty of it, is the parliamentary budget officer came out with a report just a couple days ago, which said that assuming that 93% of foreign workers or non-permanent residents, so students as well, assuming 93% who don't get permanent residents do leave, that reduces the housing gap by 45%, I think. There's still a housing gap. So arguably, if the goal is to get this to match to housing, it's still not enough.
It isn't.
For the problem to get worse, for the housing situation to get worse. Like, so like, yeah, like that's the thing, is like and this is why I think it will probably get more strict, is the housing situation. If there still is a housing gap after all this, with the assumption that all these people leave, which I don't think will happen, and I don't think you think will happen, the situation economically and the housing supply issue will only worsen. And I think that they will be under pressure politically to do more. And you can see it in some of the comments in this YouTube. Like, it's, people saying it's not enough. And that is going to be the difficulty of the next few years, will be this tension of the politics saying there's too many people and businesses saying we want to keep our employees, or we have people who are very skilled from abroad who we need. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. It's an ongoing debate, right, from both sides.
Yeah. But and how do you imagine, if you're a visa officer, does your paradigm and how you view applications change? Assuming it's not all Chinook anyways, but like, let's say you are a visa officer. Like,
I would think that they may have some sort of a directive, as in, for example, I'm already seeing that the number of spouse open work permit refusals have gone up. Earlier, about a few months back, they were approving almost all spouse open work permits. Now they are suddenly refusing most spouse open work permits, even though nothing has been said out loud. So you can already see that discretion being applied. And yeah, I think once the announcement is made, then you will see more of that happening. But yes, I mean, as you're saying, that the visa officers will have that discretion as to what they are going to do. Uh, okay, any prediction of the nature of draws in 2025? Well, at least I think that the category draws will continue. I think that Canadian experience class, of course, Stephen loves those draws. That Canadian experience class draws would obviously continue because now they have a separate category in Canada Focus. But do you
Yeah,
have anything else that you think might happen
I
with the
think that if
draws?
Pierre Poilievre wins, he will get rid of the Francophone targets, and that will reallocate 30 odd thousand spots to international students, other people working in Canada would be sort of my other. It just seems like such an obvious adjustment
You might have.
that could be made political, without significant political consequence. And certainly, like, arguably, the Liberals may be the party of Montreal, which Francophone lobby may be stronger than, say, in Western Canada, where the Conservatives are traditionally the bases. And that would be the only thing that I would see on draws, is that if Pierre Poilievre wins, they'll get rid of, or at least really reduce, the Francophone draws.
You've just made him the poster boy of all the international students.
Well, it's really weird. Like, kind of like I've spoken with quite a few consultants, primarily with people like who represent Indian clientele, and they have raised this exact issue with MPs, being like, why are we advertising Francophone draws for people who are outside the country when, like, our businesses, our students, our family members, like, it's a zero-sum game. You've selected them over us. And I've been really surprised that they're kind of not, they've gone from a 4% target to, I think, a 10% target. Like, if anything, they've doubled the other way. So I think that would be my one, prediction election wise on what would the impact on draws will be. Is it just seems like an easy decision to make. And people have commented that I don't like Francophones, which isn't the case. It's just, in a zero-sum game world, I would put
It's a
them
numbers
behind.
game.
Like,
Yeah,
there are
it's just a numbers
categories of
game.
people who I don't think that should be the determining factor in economic immigration.
Okay, what do you think about that? What about diversity?
I don't know. What
Somebody's
about
question.
it? What about it?
Yeah, what about but you know what, Stephen? Thank you so much. Thank you for coming in again and having this discussion with me. It's always such a pleasure to have you here
Yeah.
to obviously pick your brain, because there's so much in there that we can learn from and gain some insight into. Thank you so much. Hopefully, we will do this again before the end of the year, if possible. If there are more changes, or sometime earlier, to see what we can pick up as in a crystal ball to see what's in store for us for
Definitely. And
2025.
hopefully we'll
But
meet
thank
in
you so much.
person. It's been a while. I didn't go. I may
It
go
has
to the
been.
next
It
CAPIC
has been.
conference just to be in your snippet of reels that you post of you hanging out with different people at CAPIC.
I would love that. I would actually do a full-fledged 3-hour, show
Oh,
with you
Joe
then.
Rogan style.
Joe Rogan style. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephen. Lovely having you here.
Awesome.
Well, that was Stephen. Thanking him so much for being here with us. Obviously, sharing so much of those nuggets with us. I know there are so many questions that you all have been posting. We have been taking them up in the discussion as we were having this today. But individual specific questions, I will do that with you guys during the live stream on Saturday. Thank you so much for joining in. This has been a great one yet again, and I shall see you next time. Take care. Good night.